Yeah, so I think we had a really productive conversation about masculinity, but I think it's like a shame we didn't really get to talk about how masculinity really affects men and how men are socialized into it, really unable, I think, to relate in some ways to each other, but also to other people in society, whether that's women or non-binary people. So I guess something I really want to talk about then is, we've acknowledged that masculinity is relational. It exists in relationship to other genders. And one obvious, most overt way we see this kind of relationship is within, say, statistics about sexual harassment and statistics about sexual assault. And that really ties into kind of what lad culture is doing at university, right? And the ways in which masculinity operates towards women. So do you have any comments on what have your experiences been like?
From my own experience within the queer culture especially, I just wanted to talk about that in particular. Gay men, first of all, there's a point to make about monosexuality and masculinity. I do think that those two things are really tied, and I think non-monosexual individuals within the community do find it very difficult because masculinity is meant to embolden either straightness or a particular type of homosexual male. It's not meant to expand to any other category, and that is the type of reductive feature which is really damaging to their expression, but also their speech and their social circles, and their safety. And I think the second point to make is that gay men, I think, often feel like they can just do whatever they like to women in a social environment. I don't think there are enough boundaries, and I think they think, oh well, because I define this way, I can treat other people as I wish because I must be somehow no threat to them or they must not feel threatened. It really violates a lot of space that they feel that they have even within the community, and I think it's been very destructive. It's had really destructive links within the community.
I think that's a really important acknowledgement about misogyny within queer spaces.
Yes.
But I think I also want to circle back to something you were saying about safety. So how safe do queer men feel around heterosexual men within spaces of lad culture? Maybe you can talk a bit more about sports and what that might mean within sporting culture, but also, how safe do queer people feel at university generally?
I think the queer safety really varies. I do find that gay men definitely feel more comfortable among heterosexual men than trans people often do, and I think that's about this reductive element of masculinity. Often the gay male can exemplify these masculine traits or almost parody them and joke about them, whereas trans men especially often feel like they can't reduce themselves to that. They don't fit on this spectrum we were talking about, and therefore they don't know how to even interact with that space or to feel safe within it when all of these features that they feel do not relate to them personally are being so instantiated so intensely.
This isn't the right scope for this conversation, but I think there's also something to say about how sports are often split up on the basis of gender.
In sports, definitely.
So,
yes.
Just on, so to go back to talk about how lad culture relates to other groups in society. I think to return to almost the definition of lad culture, I think it's a culture which can accept, trivialise, and even encourage casual racism, sexism, and homophobia, and bullying as well. Almost, I think that's what comes to mind. Yeah, when people think of lad culture and the negative aspects of masculinity, and I think that is something where it doesn't have to. I don't think sports has to be linked with that, but I think that historically and even now, it's often been associated with sport. That kind of, especially now with the use of the word banter, things are passed off.
Shruti mentioned the LSE rugby team. It's just made me want to cry. It's just so blatant sexism. It was ridiculous. They're handing out. You hear about that? Handing out pamphlets at Freshers' Fair, describing slut shaming and stuff like that. It's just
something I want to talk about though is drinking, right? And how you think drinking both ties in to lad culture but also to sexual harassment. Because a big part of the way in which masculinity is constructed for cis heterosexual men is around the objectification but also the sexualization of women. And often that's happening in student spaces that we frequent. And that's almost aggressive behavior on the behalf of men towards women, but who is that performance for, right? Who is that performance for, and what do you think, how entrenched do you think it is within your respective spheres? of university life?
I mean, drinking removes, so you get so drunk that you think, well, whatever, it's going to be a really good idea, and then go and perform some stupid mindless act that just makes no sense.
Well, no, but what I'm really trying to get at is there's always a cultural context to the way in which we're taking substances, right? Yeah. So there's a certain way we know drinking makes you act, and then therefore it makes it more permissible to act certain ways once you've taken that kind of substance. I think that's just true for many kinds of drugs as well. So, and also, I mean, there's different kinds of, like, say, hegemonic masculinities that are invoked by drinking alcohols, and there's this, like, a long-standing relationship between, say, alcohol, sports and sexual assault. There's some pretty compelling statistics about how rates of sexual assault and domestic violence go up around times of important sporting events, right? So I think what I'm really trying to get at is, how do you think masculinity is constructed in relationship with alcohol, but also, you know, sexual assault?
I think there's this parallel between the sort of excessive consumption, the sort of plundering of the alcohol, and then also the kind of, you know, how that is sort of mirrored in our kind of objectification and exploitation of women. So I think there's kind of encouraging these things in excess with irrationality under these kind of constructs that we are the sort of owners, that we're in charge of these types of things. So that would be the link between the two there. I think that the point about alcohol is sort of giving you this free pass because it evokes this social disinhibition is fraudulent. I think we can't hide behind that. It's unacceptable. I think sporting clubs especially play that card way too easy, and that's something that we should call out and say, because you've got a boozy culture, doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make that okay.
Just because you
do that,
drink 12 pints or whatever doesn't give you the right to go and grope a girl. I mean, that's just unacceptable, whatever.
And I think it's not just the groping, it's also the kind of the words, the kind of the cat calls, all of these remarks which are, you know, none of it is okay. And I think the alcohol fosters those types of kind of behaviours, but we've got to be sort of mindful that, you know, that's not okay, and we should be trying as best possible to call it out and limit that where possible. Okay.
Yes, but I mean, but we also know, say, drinking culture is fairly entrenched at university, right? And I mean, that doesn't just operate to the exclusion of, say, you know, women, because obviously some women drink, but also about non-drinking communities, right? So I guess I kind of want to ask, what do you think we can do about this? How do you think we can change, like, large cultural conceptions of the way in which it's acceptable to act when you're drunk?
So I think there's nothing wrong per se with enjoying a drink or even enjoying being drunk, I think. But what we have to remove is the idea, like Titus said, that can be some kind of protective veil for doing things that you wouldn't otherwise do. There has to be absolutely zero tolerance, regardless of how much you've been drinking, for being misogynistic, being aggressive. But I think in terms of campus life, I do think, and something that you notice as soon as you arrive in Freshers, is that a lot of campus life and student life is based around drinking, and it very much traditionally has been. And the problem is that doesn't reflect the university we have now. I think, and therefore, and particularly with sports teams where that culture is particularly prevalent, I think it's one of the big challenges that we have to face. Whilst there's nothing wrong with sometimes having activities which involve drinking, but also making sure that the activities and the socials that we go on include everybody and cater for every.
I think there's definitely been an excessive paradigm within our institution, especially with just drinking culture on Freshers, all of the events really, all of the club nights for drinking, the waterfront events and all of that, even within the union, and there isn't enough space at all for people who don't drink.
Yeah, I kind of want to pick up on two things. So one, about zero tolerance. So don't judge me, I was reading the Evening Standard on the tube, I think yesterday, and I think there's been this large call because of heightened numbers of people approaching rape support centres, basically saying that, being drunk isn't an excuse. It can't be an excuse anymore in the law, and it definitely at least shouldn't be in our activist spaces. If someone chooses not to report, then that's completely fine, but excusing that kind of behavior just because two people were drunk, I don't think should be acceptable anymore, and I'm really glad to see you guys nodding along. But I mean, yeah, but I think on the second point about all Freshers events being catered around drinking, I think that also kind of invokes certain kinds of masculinity. Yes. So I think there was one, events where you dress up a certain way, that encourage, the exclusion of other groups. Or I think that also feeds into, say, both commodifying masculinity in order to sell it to people, but then also commodifying it in a way that reinforces certain kinds of
Definitely, and I think like through this commodification, it enforces certain images as well. So often the groups dressed up as are making fun of oppressed groups and things, and then this gets invoked with a party and like drinking and things as well, which then leads to further stigmatization of those groups who don't drink or don't want to get involved and don't want to be parodied themselves. So I think it is, they are all interlinked together, and it is all a cycle unless we take active steps to basically have spaces where that isn't the case and to crack down on those where it is necessary as well.
And review the sponsors that, you know, the university
Absolutely.
is engaging with.
Yeah.
I mean, being drunk shouldn't be a shield for being a knob.
Yep.
I think the point you made as well about the way that alcohol links to masculinity is something that we need to address, because I think it is definitely seen as an aspect of traditional masculinity that you can drink a lot, you can down a pint, you know, and that's something that we need to separate, especially like we said at university, and you know, not just people, there are some groups who don't drink, but also more and more individuals are taking the decision that they don't want to drink or don't want to drink to excess, and I know that it can drive people away from groups like sport clubs that they would otherwise enjoy because they don't want to be part of, you know, because some people don't enjoy drinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think also something to keep in mind is the relationship between alcohol and femininity, right? So also about how alcohol is often used to victim blame. You know, you were drinking, you don't really remember what happened, so this can't have happened to you, and it's often used to discredit.
Yeah, completely. I mean, and again, that's where we need to have a sort of a zero tolerance approach as well. I mean, for people to desperately play that card is mortifying. So again, it's about having this kind of, this set of ethics that everybody kind of adheres to, that we kind of completely, make that a disgusting, reprehensible thing that, we can never condone whatsoever. And I think that comes, I think that the union has a big role to kind of playing, ensuring that those types of kind of excuses are never afforded the kind of chance to kind of be given. So I think there's two kind of practical aspects to kind of this. So talking about how we can stop alcohol being such a pervasive aspect, particularly of the freshers events and some of the kind of sporting clubs, is that we simply try and take it away or reduce it. So there are two ways I think we could do that. One is, I'm aware in some universities that alcohol is subsidised in some instances, and maybe that's not a good use of student fees money. And the second aspect is having kind of cultural awareness officers who are able to kind of show this different perspective, that some people will be explicitly excluded when alcohol is such a kind of prevalent aspect of the event. So having people who are constantly kind of conveying this different perspective, I think will encourage this type of kind of shared experience which isn't centered on alcohol, which then perpetuates the masculinity.
I mean, the subsidization of alcohol is a pretty interesting thing to talk about anyway. I mean, I know like loads of people from the sporting community showed up to an AGM last year and voted in like a motion that said they wanted what, £2 snake bite? £1 snake bite? Yeah, and I mean, I think that's also, important things to be thinking about in terms of the fact that many people may not have had access to alcohol when they were growing up, or like, might actually want to come to university and be, like, I think the great thing about university is that it allows people to experiment, it allows people to, but that can't come at the expense of toxic cultures towards other people.
I think that's the point, is that there's nothing wrong with people who want to. There's nothing wrong with people wanting to drink, and if men or people of all genders want to drink, then that's absolutely fine. But we have to separate that, so that if you're male and don't want to drink, that is also fine. Being male doesn't mean that you should have to enjoy drinking, and we have to make sure that is completely removed as an idea.
No, but even the choice of drink as well. I mean, snake bite is just disgustingly lethal. I mean, no, you laugh, but it's a drink designed to get you drunk as fast as possible. So I mean, if you drank like more tolerable stuff like beer or Guinness or something like that, or just neat vodka, then you might be able to just calm down the sort of stupid inhibitions. I mean, you drink a pitcher or a couple of pints of snake bite, and then you just think you're king of the world and you can do whatever you want, which is just completely wrong. So
yeah, so I mean, I feel like we've come to an interesting kind of consensus on what not only just the roles of masculinity and lad culture, but also how that feeds into things like, say, alcohol, and then the persistent condoning, often encouraging, of sexual harassment on campus. So yeah.